Across America, BP supports more than 275,000 jobs to keep energy flowing. Jobs like expanding capacity for biodiesel in Washington state and reducing operational emissions in the Gulf of Mexico. It's and, not or. See what doing both means for energy nationwide at bp.com/investing in America.
Have you heard? You can listen to your gripping investigations ad-free. Good news. With Amazon Music, you have access to the largest catalog of ad-free top podcasts included with your Prime membership. To start listening, download the Amazon Music app or visit amazon.com/truecrime ad-free. That's amazon.com/truecrime ad-free. And catch up on the latest episodes without the ads.
Content warning. This episode contains discussion of murder and graphic violence against women.
We've all heard of Jack the Ripper. He's a symbol as much as he is a real historical serial killer, a figure representing brutal, base evil, as well as society's violent disregard of impoverished women.
In a nutshell, Jack the Ripper is a still unidentified serial killer who preyed upon women in London's Whitechapel district in 1888. He had 5 canonical victims, although there is debate on the exact number. His crimes were marked by an intense brutality and desire to mutilate. Unfortunately, despite an intensive investigation, no one was ever prosecuted for these vicious crimes.
Today, we're back with Ripperologist Jim McKenna. He knows a ton about this case because he's been studying the Ripper for many years. He's also recently come out with a book, Penny Black, a collection of mysterious stories to draw on Jim's own fascination with horror. Please check it out. We're linking to it in our show notes.
We spoke to Jim in our previous episode. If you haven't heard that yet, go back and check it out. Today, Jim is going to walk us through his theory of the murders. It's in-depth. He's going to name names and give reasons. He'll point out the intriguing possibilities, as well as the problems with coming to a conclusion about a centuries-old case. My name is Anya Kane. I'm a journalist.
And I'm Kevin Greenlee. I'm an attorney.
And this is The Murder Sheet.
We're a true crime podcast focused on original reporting, interviews, and deep dives into murder cases. We're The Murder Sheet.
And this is Jack the Ripper with Jim McKenna, a suspect. It's such a terrifying case. I'm curious, what are your thoughts about what happened? I mean, we do know that serial killers do stop sometimes, usually due to age, it seems like. I'm thinking of specifically BTK and the Golden State Killer. But what are your thoughts on what might have happened here?
Well, Anya, I agree with you. One of the things that I always hate and it's pretty much about, I wouldn't say hate, but don't like about some conversations I hear is when somebody will say, well, it's impossible that she left her keys here because she would never have done that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yes, you would have. You've done it. I've done it. We change our methods, and serial killers too. Well, they never stop. They cannot stop. You don't know that. With enough blunt force applied in some kind of direction, somebody can change course, and they often do. So, yeah, getting to my beliefs, okay, I think the best way to look at this is to look at the evidence that is there. Now, with the Jack the Ripper case, we have a lot of knowledge about this. I just detailed a lot of information to you about the area, the people, the different social structures, and even a little bit into the police who are investigating the case. But that's just a lot of broad knowledge about Jack the Ripper sort of as a whole. But if you look at the case itself, there are very few facts. As investigative journalists, I think some of the things you've done have been into really long ago sort of cold cases where memory is not a part of it anymore. And all you really have are facts that you want to get to that can lead you to a broader understanding. And this is really the opposite. We have this large, like I said, iconic image, but very few facts. I was very excited, as a young man, because November 1988, well, that was the 100-year mark, and they were going to open the Ripper records. Man, I was excited. I was all kinds of excited, as were Ripperologists all over the place. And it turned out to be interesting, but not much. Mm. All right. Mm-hmm. The file had been pilfered through. Pieces of it had been taken for other projects. There was some interesting information in there, but not as much as anyone thought. And then it also turns out that the bulk of the information on a very exhaustive investigation for the time was destroyed by the Nazis in World War II because the Blitzkrieg hit London. And several police stations and record halls were hit by bombs. And what did remain, which was not much, was salvaged up, boxed, or baled up and stuck in a dank warehouse until somebody had a chance to sort through this mess. And let's be clear, they always had better things to do. So a lot of the interview case notes and things like this are gone. So we're looking at this kind of sideways. We're looking at this from letters of people who were involved, diaries of who were involved, memoirs, newspaper articles, which are questionable, but the notebooks and conversations by reporters are illuminating, you see. So we're looking at this from a couple of different directions, but that's where I think it has to start. And you also need to be sure to contextualize it properly. You have to put these in its location, in the context that it happened, and try not to add filters that seem to make sense that have become vogue or we think may be right over the last 135 years. I can tell you that I do not think that a celebrity or a known person is the killer. All right. No, I do not think Lewis Carroll was Jack the Ripper. All right. The guy who wrote Alice in Wonderland was a creepy guy. We know that now.
Yeah.
All right. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And you don't think the royal family did it? Sorry to Alan Moore.
Yeah, I love From Hell. Don't get me wrong. That's a fantastic graphic novel. And I'm scared of Christ Church to this day. To me, every time I look at that Hawthorne Church there, or Hawksmoor Church, I go, ew. I think, that's scary. But no, I don't think that an artist, Walter Sickert comes to mind. Have you heard of that one at all?
Yeah, that's the suspect put forth by Patricia Cornwell, if I remember correctly.
Correct. I'll touch on that really, really briefly. I have no intention of disrespecting anybody as I'm talking about this, by the way. Ad hominem attacks are just not me. I'll goof on myself all day long, but I'm going to be nice to everyone else.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But there's no writer, no politician, no artist, no royal dynastic heir or their attendants, their surgeons, their drivers are actually viable suspects. In the larger milieu, yeah, they could have been, but no, they weren't. It's just kind of the same thing. Why is everyone who has a past life Napoleon?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Can just be some random peasant.
Yeah. I know if I had one, I was executed for something and probably stealing a pig or something. I just know. I also do not believe the killer was an American. Now, there are American suspects. The silliest one was when a descendant of H.H. Holmes tried to make a claim that his descendant was Jack the Ripper, and nonsense. Just no. There's a popular suspect named Tumblety, Francis Tumblety, who was definitely a kook and a weirdo, but he was not the Ripper. He was up to some skullduggery, certainly, but the killer was not an American. In my opinion, he was a British citizen or a recent immigrant from Europe. He may have been a sailor, But if so, Whitechapel or Spitalfields was definitely his home. Because he knew the place. He was comfortable there. And it was not that he got to the place to do his crimes then left. He was immersed in the zeitgeist in that area. I do not believe he was from the upper or middle classes. Now, that was the thing that was going around at the time, because everybody was following this case, and there was kind of this wild thrill that people got to think, ooh, he could be one of us. You know, he could be going down to the darkness, to the poverty-stricken areas, and he could be doing that and then coming back. And that even made it into the dance halls and music shows at the time. There was a popular character, recurring character in these called Champagne Charlie. And he was kind of a toffy, goofy guy, upper class guy. And he was portrayed a few times in a very sinister aspect during this time to give people a thrill. But no, he wasn't. I believe he did have a job, though. And I think he held it as long as his decaying mental state allowed him to. He was not homeless. He had a place to live. Now, it could have been, like I said, a space on the floor, but he had a place to live, and people knew him. I believe that he had a good knowledge of anatomy, but not necessarily human anatomy, or at least he had anatomy that was initially not learned on a human body, if you follow what I'm saying. He could navigate around a body cavity, but I don't think that he was trained at that at all. And I doubt that he worked in a field like a corpse washer or something like this, where he had access to bodies. He had to know more or less where the organs were to do what he did. And I think that's about it. I do not believe he was left-handed. A lot of people think the Ripper was left-handed. The reason for that is because of bruising on the body that suggested that the women were grabbed from behind and the knife pulled across their throat. I don't think that that's the case. I don't think that's how the murders happened. I'll get to that in a second. I think his goal was murder and not sexual assault. Was there a sexual component to the crimes? Probably, the way that these things are. But the goal was to kill, straight up. 3 of the 5 victims, like I said, were not identifiable sex workers, and it's just speculation. All right. There were 2, Elizabeth Stride and Mary Jane Kelly, that could have been engaged in prostitution, and perhaps, especially with Mary Kelly, inviting a stranger into her room, that really suggests that perhaps that was a catalyst to her death. And I do believe that is possible. But the 3 others, they were exhausted, they were ill, and they were alone, and that made them vulnerable enough. Now I got to go a little deeper into kind of a personal thought process.
Please do.
If you want to, if you want to understand what happened by taking a look at the bodies, at the evidence, you need to not look at the last one, Mary Jane Kelly. All right. A lot of people over the years, too many people, have romanticized Mary Kelly. She was the youngest one, for starters. She was said to be very pretty. She was also the one that we don't have any information about. We don't know where her family, we don't know where she came from. Maybe she was from Ireland, maybe she was from Wales. No one is really sure. And that is an open invitation to fill in the blanks on your own. And people have. I read a book a few years ago by an American doctor who somehow claimed that he was a family descendant of Mary Kelly. And where he came up with that, I still don't know. And I was interviewing him at the time, and I had a really hard time whatevering over that because, wow, people have romanticized. Look at Alan Moore from Hell, right? Mary Kelly is a prominent figure in that. In the Royal Conspiracy Theory, he was an assistant to Walter Sickert. So people always look at that, and her mutilation was the most vicious. So if you really want to understand it, go to her. And I say no.
Here at the Murder Sheet, we work on the podcast and our investigative reporting full time. That means we sometimes don't have time to meticulously plan and cook delicious and nutritious meals. So, in this new year, we are eternally grateful to our sponsor, Factor.
Now's a great time to try out ready-to-eat meal delivery service Factor. Remember, When you support our great sponsors like Factor, you're supporting us and our ability to keep doing this work. So please consider visiting factormeals.com/msheet50 and use code msheet50 to get 50% off.
Factor allows you to pop your ready-made meal into the microwave. In 2 minutes flat, you'll have a hot and ready dish with minimal cleanup afterward. It's just that simple.
Also, this food is awesome. I recently dug their black bean and rice enchilada bowl with roasted zucchini, corn, and salsa verde. It tasted so fresh and flavorful.
I love that we get to skip meal prep, the grocery stores, expensive to-go orders, and elaborate cleanup. Plus, there's plenty of options for extra picky eaters like me.
We've really been thrilled with Factor, and we feel you will be too if you're striving to eat healthy and save time in 2024. It's really helped me meet my nutritional goals for the new year.
Head to factormeals.com/msheet50 and use code msheet50 to get 50% off. That's code msheet50 at factormeals.com/msheet50 to get 50% off.
I think you need to look at the fourth one, Catherine Eddowes. And you can see what he wanted to do writ large on her body. If you take a look first at Hallie Nichols and then at Annie Chapman, you see a progression of permissive violence. He was unsure about what he was doing with Hallie Nichols, and he left her on the street without clearly mutilated her, but not exactly what he wanted. He felt insecure at something. Somebody heard a banging outside of the backyard at Hanbury Street that may have scared him away, some people think. And he didn't get as far as he wanted to do with Annie Chapman, or maybe he didn't know it. But I think with Catherine Eddowes, he did everything he wanted to do. He displayed that body. He mutilated the face in a very specific way, including 2 triangular-shaped cuts under each eye, which is weird. All right, I've never seen a rational explanation for that. I've heard some ideas and I've always discounted them. He meant to do that. He was, for another way to put it, he was decorating. And I think that if you look at that, you can get a really good idea of what he saw in his twisted, perverted mind. Whatever bats and fire were going on in there, this is what it was telling him to do. I think the method of killing, except for Mary Kelly, and maybe this is how he subdued her, was he choked out the victim from the front, grabbed him by the throat quickly, and gripped hard, cutting off the blood until they passed out. Immediately when they were on the ground, he cut their throats, kind of covering it so the blood would not get on him as it sprayed out. And while they were bleeding out, then he began his eviscerations, which happened very rapidly. The police, I believe, they had suspects. And as I referenced before, those suspects became a little more accurate once police officials moved away from the gang theory. There was time in there that they became more willing to look at the likelihood of a Jewish immigrant because there was evidence that was pointing that way. One of them was a red herring. You probably heard of Leather Apron.
Yes.
Leather Apron was an actual weirdo guy who wore a leather apron like a cobbler's apron and who loved to yell and berate women he knew were prostitutes out on the street and harass them and even chase them. And a filthy, discarded leather apron was found in the backyard at Hanbury Street, and that hit the media. They eliminated him as a suspect, but I think that was part of the reason they started being willing to look at maybe there were Jewish immigrants that they needed to talk to. Fears over public outrage and their own failures played a big part in the high-level decisions of the Metropolitan Police, okay? They had a lot of clear ideas that were happening, and we can see those from the very strange directions, okay? And this is an example I can give you to kind of demonstrate what Ripperology is really like. Robert Anderson was the superintendent of police. He was in charge of inspections. He was under Melville McNaughton. Anderson was told by McNaughton to put another man named Donald Swanson in overall supervisory charge of the investigation. This happened in mid-September. Swanson was given an office in Scotland Yard. He was relieved of all of his other duties, and he was told to focus on the Whitechapel murders that he had, and the word went out, he had permission to see every cable, every telegram, every interview note, every record, every single thing had to come through his office so he could see it. And he stayed at that post for 2 years. He saw this thing inside and out. In 1910, he had retired, and Robert Anderson, the head of all of this, had written 2 memoirs. He had a very broad career, not only in police work. One of those volumes is called The Lighter Side of My Official Life. Swanson had a copy of it. Okay, here we go. Flash forward to 1981. James Swanson, the grandson of Donald Swanson, was looking through his grandfather's stuff. He found that book, he opened it, and he found that his grandfather had written something in the margins of the book on the page that has to do with Jack the Ripper. That is now known as the Swanson marginalia.
Oh my gosh.
Yes, the Swanson marginalia, because it is a fascinating little thing where he takes a step farther, because Anderson was really vague was what he wrote about. Anderson had sort of written that, well, it's not very polite for me right now to say what I think about everything that happened with the Jack the Ripper case. I can even tell you that I could identify who it is, which is a hell of a thing to say in a book. Okay.
Yeah.
But he said it is not good form to undercut the et cetera, ongoing investigation, whatever. And he didn't say that. Look, to me, why am I picturing Nigel Bruce tiff-topping this over his eggs and bacon? You know what? Okay.
I'm dead because now that's all I'm seeing. So thanks a lot, Jim.
But I am. That's what I think. And the thing is that Swanson described out what the guy's actually talking about, that there was a suspect. The suspect had been identified by an eyewitness. The suspect knew he had been identified by a witness, but the witness would not make an official claim because they were both Jews. And the witness was afraid of causing a hysteria, not for his own safety, but he was afraid. Given the history of Jews and violence, you know what? I'm not surprised, and I don't know if I blame the guy. Okay? I'll tell you that plain.
Yeah.
According to the Swanson marginalia, this man, who was under observation for deranged mental health, he had tried to attack someone with a knife, and he was taken in. He was also, one of the reasons that he was under therapy was he was, quote, prone to solitary vices.
Okay.
Yeah. So, yeah. He was released. He was released, and he was put under watch night and day. Then he had a mental breakdown, and he was bound up, and he was taken to a workhouse where he was put under protective observation. He went crazy in there too. And then he was put into a lunatic asylum where he died in the 1910s. Now, this is from Donald Swanson. This was the Swanson marginalia. Once you take a look at exactly what you have, some very strong suspects emerge.
If you're listening to the Murder Sheet, you love true crime. That means you're willing to stare into the darkest places in order to seek the truth. There's a truth in fictional darkness too, namely horror and thriller stories that tap into our morbid sides. Well, if that sounds interesting to you, we'd encourage you to pick up a copy of Penny Black, a collection of stories from Ripperologist and fiction author Jim McKenna.
I'm a big fan of collections of short stories. I love the punch that a short story can pack, the brief, chilly immersion into new worlds. My favorite stories here are probably The Space Between the Stars, a haunting tale about a sheriff investigating a backcountry murder who stumbles onto something much, much worse, along with Penny and the Wolf, a story about ranchers facing supernatural terror. I just love the way Jim blends horror and action in this book.
We bought the book, and we've really enjoyed it. We just tore through the stories, and it's a welcome addition to our admittedly already too large library. If it sounds interesting, we'd strongly recommend it to you. We think Jim is great, and we love supporting talented independent fiction writers.
It's the perfect gift for the horror lover in your life. Or you can treat yourself to it if you'd like to experience spooky, spine-tingling terror and dread, but like in a cozy way, reading on your couch on a dark, rainy day. We'll link to the Amazon page in our show notes.
I wanted to go to one more place before I identify who I think. A few years ago, a shawl appeared, purportedly owned by Catherine Eddowes. This has been lurking around for a while, according to the idea that there was a police constable on the scene in Mitre Square. He had taken the shawl and he hid it away. It was passed down through his family as being one of the murder victims. It was sold at auction in, I think, the 1990s, late 1990s, and then DNA tests were done on it. And this was when in 2015, I think, in 2017, they announced that they had solved the murder, that they had identified Catherine Eddowes' familial DNA on the shawl and identified a killer, both of them based on some kind of family thing. But I don't believe it. And I'm not just saying that because I don't want my myth broken. Okay. I was very excited when this happened for a reason that I'm going to drop. But the thing is that they were up to something. They refused to give any of the scientific information out. They refused to have their studies and information peer reviewed. The methodology behind it, getting the DNA and what they were identifying as a DNA profile turned out to be very small and subject to a very large segment of the population. And then they just vanished and refused to talk about it anymore, which is weird.
Very suspicious, frankly.
However, I would have probably liked to hop up on a soapbox and jump up and down because they identified my suspect. And that suspect is also the name that was given in the Swanson marginalia. It was also in something called the McNaughton Memoranda. And that name is Kosminski. Specifically, Aaron Kosminski. But again, we've got to go into the weeds on this thing because there's problems with identifying. He is often confused with 2 and possibly even 3 other people. And a wonderful researcher named Martin Fido in the late 1980s and into the 1990s, following this theory that Kosminski was the suspect, which is the line that's in the McNaughton Memoranda. He actually went to find the old asylum records, and he found them. And over months, he painstakingly looked through all of them to try to find the name. And at first, he failed. And then when it came back with a different spelling, he did actually find something. And then that was kind of associated with another name. And that name was Kosminski. So Kosminski, Kosminski. And then another third name called Aaron Cohen. If this is all confusing to you, good, because it is confusing. All right. I could sit here with a laser pointer and a poster board, and I still can't quite explain it correctly. But the idea is that because of mismanaged records, misspellings of names, and an unsure ongoing record of interrogations and reports, we don't exactly know which Aaron Kosminski we're talking about, what his origin was, or when he was exactly apprehended. But if I had to put somebody's name to this, it would be Aaron Kosminski. He fits pretty well.
Tell us about him.
Well, he was a Polish immigrant escaping the pogroms in Poland. Pogroms, by the way, was the persecution of Polish Jewry by the Russians at that time. And they were seeking asylum and granted asylum in Great Britain. He came over and first worked as a hairdresser, which sounds odd, but there you go, and a barber. He started demonstrating very wild and erratic behavior. He started talking nonsense. He started acting out in ways that were violent if anyone touched him. He became obsessed with food, so much so that he would not allow himself to be fed and would only eat food he found on the street. All right, which is really strange. He developed some kind of an intense persecution complex that was not really defined. And like I said, let's throw in the solitary vices. For that, it was either his wife or a common law wife that he eventually tried to attack and stab with a knife. That's what put him in the asylum. It was during that time that a witness who had seen the third victim, Elizabeth Stride, talking to someone on the street, a man named Lowende. He said he got a really good look at this guy. They took him to a place, something called the Seaside Home, which was a kind of a convalescent home for police officers that had just been built. And then they took Kosminski out of the asylum and they brought them there so he could see the guy. And according to Anderson and the Swanson marginalia, he identified him but would not officially swear to it. So the exact reasons that put him at the scenes of different crimes, well, frankly, we don't know. It's gone. But there was enough reason that 3 of the top officials in charge of the investigation all had him on their short list. Swanson, for his part, actually named him as that's the guy. You see? So are there gaps in there? Absolutely. And I have known about Kosminski for a long time, and I've rolled with it. I've discounted it. There's another story that is exactly goes along with this, the story of a man named David Cohen. David Cohen was a raving lunatic who a couple of weeks after, oh, by the way, all of these arrests and taken out of society and things, they happened just a few weeks after Mary Kelly was killed.
Oh,
so
wow.
it took him off the board. That's the thing I forgot to mention. You see what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So David Cohen is another example. Now, he was a man who was found raving in the street, and he was insanely violent. Again, we have a lot of missing records, but it took a long time for him to get over this psychotic episode, and arguably if he ever did at all, because we don't have an exact record of it, but apparently he died while still insane. Or did he? Because there has been speculation that the records of Kosminski, David Cohen have been mixed up. And so one person may reference person A to somebody who thinks they're talking about person B, you see? And is saying, oh, yeah, well, he told me person A was this. And that's not what he said at all. You see, it's kind of like if you're trying to identify where Kevin went and somebody misidentified him as me and they gave my whereabouts.
Oh, man.
Yeah, I know. Okay. Yeah. So if I had to lock down on one, is that my favorite suspect as far as a likely one? I want to say yes. I spent a lot of time with another guy named William Berry, Bury. And I've written quite a bit about him. He is a remarkable suspect in my mind to this day. He was an abusive alcoholic who lived with his wife right there in just kind of south of Spitalfields. The reason that, and I suppose I just have to put it this way. The reason that he is a suspect that I really like is because he had a horse and a cart. All right. Now follow me on this. His job was he delivered sawdust. He was a sawdust man. And he delivered sawdust to different places around Whitechapel. Picked it up in the morning, delivered it late at night to slaughterhouses and other places that would use it as an absorbent on their floor. He was known to be very violent. He attacked people with knives a couple of different times, getting into fights, tried to kill his wife. She stayed with him. And shortly after the death of Mary Kelly, he had had enough, and he he moved away. He moved to Dundee, Scotland. Shortly thereafter, he murdered his wife. He murdered his wife and he cut up her abdomen pretty bad. When the police noticed a smell, or a smell was reported, they went in and they investigated his house. And they walked down into the cellar of this house and they found the body. But what they also found written in chalk on one of the doors were the words, "Jack the Ripper is behind these doors." I think that he is a dark horse candidate. And the reason I said about the cart and the horse. First off, before I do that, there were a lot of cryptic comments that his wife had made about the Whitechapel murders because they were gossiping with their new neighbors. She made a lot of strange comments about how she knew for a fact that they were over, that Jack the Ripper is gone now. And there was other things that are just cryptic, kind of creepy and cryptic. There was another thing that caught my attention is that in the real heat wave of these crimes, when the bodies would be discovered, a lot of times they were just freshly dead and police were fanning out all over the place. And they were looking for people who were moving down the street. I don't think they were looking at horses and carts. I think they were looking around them at the people who were skulking down the lane. And if you want to move secretly and hide in plain sight in Whitechapel, then don't be a pedestrian. And that's stuck with me since I was 20 years old.
Wow.
Is it right? I don't know. But there you have it.
Jeez. How do you keep all of this straight? Because so much of what you've been saying, I mean, everything from maybe suspects' records getting confused and people weighing in with DNA and then vanishing. I mean, how do you try to, and it really sounds, I commend you for this. It really sounds like you've really tried to kind of take everything with a grain of salt. You're not becoming emotionally invested in like one POI, which is something we've seen in plenty of cases where people can do that. How do you maintain that balance and also keep all of this information straight?
Yeah, it's a lot. You know, I'm a sucker for pretty much any Jack the Ripper book that comes out, whether I keep it for a long time or not. I said to my wife once, I think I've read the coroner's inquest of Hallie Nichols more times than I saw my parents kiss. After a while, things just become thematically significant in different ways. How do I balance it? I have kept a series of different records and files. When I was in high school, I had a Ripper file in a 3-wing Empire Strikes Back binder. When the computer age came, I started keeping my own files and records that way. I have a spreadsheet index of names that I've created, and when a new one shows up from a source, I will drop it in there and then start doing research on it when I have time. I've become good at selecting different avenues to pursue, knowing that the only thing I'm going to really do with this is to tuck it away. It may mean something, it may not. And it's just something I like deep, complicated hobbies. I'm not an athletic man, so I like to do things that are intellectually challenging. For a while there, I got really into the American Civil War, and I spent a lot of years researching and studying that phenomenon. And then I let it go because it didn't interest me anymore. I'm fascinated with the works of William Shakespeare, and I dip into him just all the time. And there are other true crime cases that I've followed. Lizzie Borden is a fascinating one that I've done a lot of research on. The Axeman of New Orleans or the Cleveland Torso murders. I like the unsolved ones, obviously. The important thing is to be realistic and don't get mad at people if they don't agree with me or if they say something that I think is silly. Just comment and move on. I kind of learned my lesson on sharing things in forums. I will write essays, but I almost never read the commentary on them because sometimes the critique becomes ad hominem attacks, and I don't deserve that, and I don't think anyone else does either. Patricia Cornwall is a good example of somebody who has been subject to a lot of criticism. I disagree with her methodology, but I don't disagree with her as a person. I think that she did her best. I think the problem that she had was she came into it wanting to identify Walter Stickert as the Ripper, and not, I want to find out who the Ripper is.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. And that's a big difference. I am also very well aware of something that is cold and silent. And that is this. He got away with it. He got away with it. It's 135 years on. He will never be brought to trial. There will never be sufficient evidence that conclusively proves that he did it, unless there's unknown time travel drone footage that I'm not aware of. All right. He got away with it. And I cannot do anything about that in the end. I can look at it with fascination. I can write about the cultural impact of the Ripper on film and media and popular culture. I can write about suspects. I get the delicious opportunity to look into where they were from and what their lives were like, which is wonderful. So I'm well set on this, but my expectations are reasonable and frankly low.
I mean, it's so fascinating to me because so much of what we've talked about today just kind of makes me, I don't know, in an odd way, feel a little bit better about our current times, because sometimes I frankly despair of true crime circles on the internet, and everything gets so crazy and there's so much rampant speculation, and there's people doing horrible things like just making stuff up or, doing crank work. And, even some of the violence that you see happening in the United States and around the world. But, things like this do remind you that everything has always been terrible in different ways, but around true crime, the behavior that a lot of human beings sort of display on that can be pretty bizarre and counterproductive, I guess, to put it diplomatically.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that one thing that I've written quite a few books. All of them are fiction. However, I've written a lot of words, essays, articles, what Whitechapel.org holds dissertations. Okay, whatever. On the case over the years, but I've never written a book. And I thought about it, and I'm still, now that I'm doing that for a living now, I'm considering it. But I think that if I was to do that, it would be more of a broader view of the Whitechapel murders as a touchstone experience in Western culture and Western history, a larger theme. I would not do that awkward, clumsy dance of trying to identify a specific suspect, which I think is hard. It's difficult, and even with the Aaron Kosminski, you heard me with the name. You drop so quickly into hearsay and speculation, and at the end, you just don't know. What I do know is worth talking about and worth writing about. And that is what the East End of London was like, what the lives of these women were like, and how that has changed the lens and the focus of pop culture, true crime, and other things to this day.
I would strongly encourage you to write that, because I think that would be fascinating to read.
Well, you're not the only one. I was talking about this to my wife yesterday, maybe day before yesterday, and she does what she always does on this. She looked up from her book and said, I really think you should do that, nodded twice and went back to her business and let me go about it again. She gives me a lot of wide room on this. Just kind of ignore.
Oh, man.
I think she was thinking, wow, that means you wouldn't talk to me about it. Yeah, you should do that. You should do that right now.
Ring him up. I mean, you're so well spoken on this subject, and I just feel like I would be very interested to read your thoughts. Just the storytelling you've displayed in our interview makes me.
Well,
yeah.
Thank you. You know what? I'm going to put a pin on that. It may happen.
I have to ask. You're an author, and where can people, if they're intrigued by some of what you've been saying and sort of might want to read some of your work, where can they find it?
I have been writing under pseudonym on Amazon and Kindle for a couple of years now, and I have a lot of those a lot of books out there, and I've been really happy with my progress. But that's not me technically, so there. I do have a book coming out under my own name, and it is a collection of horror stories. Actually, they're long-form novellas, and all featuring a central character, and her name is Penny Black, and that will be my first book under my own name. Penny Black, by the way, is the name of the world's first adhesive postage stamp. It has Queen Victoria on it.
Wow.
So that's going to be coming out. It'll be available on Amazon under Jim McKenna. I'm really excited about that.
This has been delightful. It's such an upsetting and awful topic, but I really enjoyed this conversation. I know Kevin did too. And we just want to thank you for taking the time to speak with us and share your expertise on this case with us.
You're welcome. And it has been a pleasure to talk to you. I've been a fanboy of yours for a while, and I like what you do, and I like the integrity that you do it with. There are a couple of podcasters that I like. They have a certain kind of organic integrity to what they do. You two are certainly one of them. The other one, if you want sort of a comparison, there's one called California Dreaming. This lady who speaks really from the heart, and sometimes with some very snarky, hilarious opinions about crimes. And the thing is that her integrity and your integrity fascinates me.
Thank you. We really appreciate that. And we're going to have to check out that show. I love the name.
Yeah. Her series on the serial arsonist, the California serial arsonist, is fantastic.
Thanks again to Jim. He's not only a great guest, but he's been a wonderful supporter of our show going way back.
Buy Penny Black and the other books we mentioned. They're linked to in our show notes.
Thanks so much for listening to The Murder Sheet. If you have a tip concerning one of the cases we cover, please email us at murdersheet@gmail.com. If you have actionable information about an unsolved crime, please report it to the appropriate authorities.
If you're interested in joining our Patreon, that's available at www.patreon.com/murdersheet. If you want to tip us a bit of money for records requests, you can do so at www.buymeacoffee.com/murdersheet. We very much appreciate any support.
Special thanks to Kevin Tyler Greenlee, who composed the music for The Murder Sheet, and who you can find on the web at kevintg.com.
If you're looking to talk with other listeners about a case we've covered, you can join the Murder Sheet discussion group on Facebook. We mostly focus our time on research and reporting, so we're not on social media much. We do try to check our email account, but we ask for patience as we often receive a lot of messages. Thanks again for listening.